What's up, YouTube friends? Now Valentine's Day is right around the corner, possibly today by the time I get this video up, and since I'm single and forever alone, I decided to spread the love by showing you how to make this mirrored heart table runner. I think it turned out just great, and Mother's gonna love it. I ended up backing the back with a St. Patrick's Day fabric, that way she can turn it over and use it next month. Now if you're not too busy with your honey bunny, stay tuned and I'll show you how fast and easy it is to whip up next. So the things you're going to need to make this mirrored heart Valentine's table runner are 4 different Valentine's prints. These are just fat quarters that I got in a fat quarter bundle, and I won't be using all of the fabrics. If you want to make it a little easier, you can just use 2 prints. But I want this scrappy, so I'm going to use 4. You'll also need some sashing and your fabric around the hearts. I chose this red. I have about a yard of it. A half a yard will probably do you just fine, but I haven't decided yet if I'm going to use this as the backing and the binding also, or what. So I just got a yard. You'll need some sort of batting. Today I'll be using this flannel scrap. It's about a half a yard. That should be just fine. You'll also need about a half a yard of backing fabric, and I haven't decided if I want to use this print or just the plain red. I'll figure that out when I get there. And you're also going to need some binding strips. Now I'm just going to use 2.5 inch strips folded in half, and they're cut the length on the bolt. I have about 4, and I think that should be plenty. I'll also be using my iron and ironing board, and I'll be using my sewing machine with matching thread. So let's get started. Now this project has a whole lot of cutting that needs to be done beforehand. So from each of my fat quarters, this is what I'll be using for my hearts. You need 1 5-inch square and 2 4.5-inch squares. Now from the red fabric, this is going to go around the hearts and be our sashing. You're going to need 4 5-inch blocks, 16 2.25-inch blocks, and 3 2-inch strips by the width of the fabric. And this is going to be our sashing. For the third strip, I just cut it into thirds. So the first thing that I'm going to make are the half square triangles on the bottom of the hearts. So to do that, you want to grab your 5-inch pieces. You're going to take one of your heart fabrics and one of your red squares, and I'm just going to lay them so that the right sides are touching. Now using my ruler and my new friction pin, it just disappears with the hot iron. I'm going to line up my ruler corner to corner and draw a line. So now I'm just going to take this over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch on either side of my line. That way when we go and cut right on our line, we'll have 2 half square triangles. So I'll get the rest of these marked up and I'll meet you over at the sewing machine. So today I'll be using a straight stitch and my length's at 2.5. And like I said, I'm going to sew 1/4 inch on either side of my line. Now recently I bought a whole bunch of presser feet off of Amazon, and so today I'll be using my 1/4 inch foot. But it is not necessary. You can just use a regular presser foot. So I'm going to line up the edge of my 1/4 inch presser foot with my line and sew. Now without even breaking my thread, I'm just going to spin it around, line the pin mark up, and sew. Just like this, and you want to do that to all 4 of your 5-inch block sets. Now I'm just going to take my ruler and my rotary cutter, and I'm going to cut directly on the line. So once we press these open, we'll have 2 half square triangles. The next step we're going to do is take our 4.5-inch squares. You should have 8 of them. I just have 1 of each pattern here in front of me now. And grab your 2.25-inch squares. Now we're going to take one of our squares, lay it so the right side is together, just like that, so that this side and this side match. Now using my ruler and my friction pin, I'm going to line it up at this corner of the red and this corner of the red. And draw a line. Next, I'm going to take a second square and I'm going to line it up on the other side. With my ruler and my friction pin, I'm going to draw a line corner to corner. Now you just want to take this over to your sewing machine and using that same straight stitch, this time though we're going to sew directly on our line. So right here and right here. So I'll still be using my straight stitch and my length is still at 2.5, but this time I'm going to sew directly on the line. One down, 7 more to go. Alright, so it should look like this once it's sewed down. And now with my scissors, I'm going to cut, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then just go ahead and press it open. Now depending on your sewing, it's probably a good idea to square these up. Now the reason why I left these 4.5 inch squares is because that's exactly the size of my ruler, so it made it really easy. For the half square triangles, I just lined up my 45-degree mark on the seam and trimmed around. For the top pieces, I really didn't have to trim much off at all. Now it's time to make some hard decisions. You could just leave each block with the same color in the middle, just like this, and that would look fine. Another thing you could do is each square be a different fabric. So let's try that. So this is what it looks like with a different fabric on each square here. And it looks okay, but not my favorite. So what I think I'm going to do is I want 2 fabrics per heart. So let's see what that looks like. Alright guys, so I think this is my favorite outcome so far, but you can do whatever you want. It's your table runner. So now we just need to sew these together, and the easiest way I find is to take the top piece with your half square triangle. We're going to fold them so that the right sides are touching, and using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew down the side. When we go to press these open, you want to press one seam up and one seam down. That way when we go to join these 2 pieces, the middle seam will nestle together nicely. So I'm using that same old straight stitch at the same length of 2.5. So after we have sewed these together, the next step is to press them. And I don't know how well you can see it, but I pressed this one so the seam is running down, and this one so the seam is going up. So now you just want to join your hearts together. So I'm just going to flip this one over and line up my middle seam here. Because we ironed them in opposite directions, they should nestle nicely. And stick a pin. Next, you want to go down at the bottom of our half square triangle and make sure that those points line up also. And at this point, I like to push one seam one way and the other seam the way we pressed it in the beginning, and those should nestle up nicely also, and stick a pin. Now you could take this back over to your ironing board and press this later, and now you want to make sure that this seam matches up. So once again, I'm going to fold one seam the opposite way just to make sure that they nestle, and stick a pin. So now I'm just going to take this back over to my sewing machine, and with the 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew right down the seam. Now as you can see here, if I line up my points, there's a little bubble of fabric left over right there. Some extra fabric. That's fine. You just want to make sure that the part with the extra fabric is at the bottom when you sew. The feed dogs tend to grab a little bit more fabric, so that'll even that right out and no one will ever know. Alright guys, so after I went ahead and sewed these together, I gave it a good press. And I went back and made sure that my seams were laying nice and flat. Now that I have all 4 of my heart blocks sewed together, we have some more options again. You could leave them just like this, put a hanger on the top and use it as a wall hanging. That would look beautiful. I actually have something very similar to this upstairs hanging on our wall. You also could turn one heart upside down and one right side up. Just like that, sew them together and be done. But on my original sketch, I like the mirrored heart look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep 2 going that way and 2 going this way. So the way I have it set up are these 2 blocks have the same fabrics and these 2 blocks have the same fabrics. That way, to my eye anyway, it looks like it's nice and evenly distributed. So I'm just going to turn these facing me for a minute. I'm going to take my top heart, lay it over the bottom. So now I'm just going to take this over to my sewing machine and with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew right across the bottom here. So now we're just going to sash these 2 together. So grab one of your 2-inch strips and cut it into thirds. I have a piece right here. So at one bottom, it doesn't matter which one, I'm going to line up my raw edges and with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew right down the bottom here. So once I have that sewed on, I'm just going to take it over to my ironing board and I'm going to press it open, and I just press it towards the side of the sashing. It really doesn't matter. And then just trim off the extra, lining it up with the edge of your hearts. So now I'm just going to take my other set of hearts and I'm going to match up this raw edge with the raw edge on my sashing. And sew that down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Alright guys, so it's getting pretty hard to keep this all in frame, but the next step we're going to do is take our other 2 smaller pieces of sashing, and I'm going to sew one right here at the top and one at the bottom. I'm going to press them open and trim off any extras. So now to finish up our table runner top, you want to take your 2 2-inch strips, cut the length of the bolt, and I'm going to put one on one side, sew it down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then one on this other side, sewing down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now on these longer strips, I do like to backstitch at the beginning and the end. All these other seams were enclosed in another seam, so that locked them together. But this point and this point will not be until we put our binding on. So just to be safe, backstitch. Alright guys, so I trimmed off my sides here and I gave it a good press. It's nice and flat. So you just want to move this off to the side for 1 minute and grab your backing and your batting. Now I decided I'm going to go for this backing fabric. While filming this video, the FedEx man finally brought me my St. Patrick's Day fabric, and I've been waiting for about 2 weeks for this. I decided I wanted to use this so that way next month Mother can just flip this over and I won't have to make her another table runner. So if you're out there shopping for backing fabric, a half a yard will be plenty. So now I'm just going to lay this down with the right side facing down. Next, you want to grab your batting. I love to use flannel. I think it just lays a lot flatter that way. But you could just use fleece or cotton or polyester batting. I'm just going to lay that on top and make sure everything's nice and smooth. I like to flip it around and make sure that the back is smooth too. And finally, you want to put your table runner top on top. And smooth it out good. Now we just want to take this over to our sewing machine and quilt. Now you can quilt any way that you want. Originally I was just going to go around the hearts, but now that I'm doing the St. Patrick's Day on the back, I'm going to keep it really simple. And I'm just going to stitch in the ditch. So just to make sure that nothing moves, I'm going to stick a pin in the middle of the blocks where I know I'm not going to sew. Alright, so it's all pinned together and we're ready to quilt this together. Now like I said, I'm going to just stitch in the ditch and I'm going to go right off onto the sashing. So probably right here I'll start and I'm going to eyeball it just until I get to my seams, and I'll go all the way across. Then I'll stop, turn the project, and I'll come down the long way. Just like that, and that'll be plenty enough quilting for me. I'll meet you over at the sewing machine. Alright guys, I'm over here on my sewing machine ready to quilt. I did raise my length to a 3. I'll still be using a straight stitch. And on this first part, you can draw a little line if you want to, but I'm just going to eyeball it. So I'm just going to line up where I think my seam is. I'm starting off of my project. And I'm just going to stitch in the ditch down all my seams. When I'm going along, I'm just making sure that everything is nice and flat. If you are using a batting, like a polyester batting or anything like that, you may want to move to a walking foot. So I'm coming up here on the end and I'm just going to sew right off my project. Alright guys, so now we have this all quilted together and now it's time to trim. Now I used white thread here to quilt these together. If you don't want to, you could just use red. But once you wash these, especially if you're using a polyester batting or a cotton batting, it'll get kind of puffy and these seams will disappear. Not so much with the flannel, but I'm okay with that. I kind of like the look of it. And here's what the back looks like, just nice and simple. So now I'm just going to take my ruler and I lined up a line right here on my ruler with this side, and with a seam. It's actually right here. Now I know everything's nice and square, so I'm going to hack off this bottom part. I'm going to flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. Now finally, we're going to do the sides. Since I know this is pretty square, I'm just going to line up my ruler with this, make sure it's nice and straight. I also went ahead and lined up some of my seam lines with my lines going this way on my ruler, just to make sure everything's nice and square. And hack it off. And finally, we just need to attach our binding. Now I'm not going to take the time to show exactly how I do the binding on this video. I have a feeling it's pretty long already. I'll link at the end of this video another video where I go into detail of how I attach my binding. And I decided today that I wanted to use the black binding. I think it will just frame this out nicely and it'll also go well with the back. Alright, so here's our finished mirrored heart table runner and I think it turned out great. I really love the black binding and it just frames everything out nicely. Now here's what the front looks like. And there's the back. I actually kind of think I like the back fabric the best. So I hope you give this project a try. If you like this video and want to see more of my videos, go down below and hit the big red subscribe button and give this video a big thumbs up. If you have a question about this video or any of my other videos, or would just like to leave a suggestion for a future upcoming video, leave me a comment. Head on over to Facebook and Twitter at Scrappy's Patch if you'd like to friend me there. And as always, thanks for watching. Hopefully you found someone this Valentine's Day. And I'll see you next time.